Hey, everybody. I am Stephen Boster, Operations Manager at Simplify Church, and I am here with Josh Henry, gosh, what do we call you? I won't say what we call you. No, I'm just kidding. Behind your back. I won't say that. I'm just kidding. Chief Simplifier at simplifychurch.com. We're excited here today because we're going to have a short discussion. Our goal really at Simplify Church is really to help have those discussions about church finances and simplify them for you so that you have more time for ministry. And so we have had some interesting questions of late, and we thought it'd be really nice to have some of those discussions with everybody. So we are talking about, dun, 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 the danger of designated funds. Now, Josh, have my deep Southern Baptist heritage from my grandfather was a deacon at a Southern Baptist church. My dad was a minister, went to seminary and did Southern Baptist. I went to a Southern Baptist church, and by golly, it's like designated funds is part of our institutional doctrine.
Well, it's in the later chapters of the books of Acts.
Is that what it is?
Yes. Yeah. Acts 30, 31, 32 starts to talk.
Something like that, right? So first off, let's talk about what designated funds are, just for those that may not know, coming from a different faith stream. And then let's talk about what some of the dangers are. And I know you've got a couple of stories about why we should be concerned about the number of designated funds. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, realistically, to fully term them, in accounting terms, they are either restricted funds or donor designated funds. Okay. And we have reduced those down into donor or into designated funds in church world. And then we also hear the terms thrown around where people are like, oh, now all of a sudden we have to have fund accounting, So yes. All of this is in the same framework. It's all the same.
Okay.
And as the IRS terms them, when you talk about restricted funds, I mean, that's a heavy word. And it truly is. It requires that the church or the organization utilizes that money that was donated to the donor's designation. So the donor says, I want to give to you for this. And you say, thank you, we will use it for that.
Right. Now, the church does set up that designated fund. So they'll say, hey, I'm going to create a special ministry or missions or support for XYZ for this ministry. And this is that designated fund.
They can, okay. Yes. But there are times when a donor might also send you money and degregate it for that, and that's one of the, and we'll put that as the sub note, pre bullet point danger number one is
okay.
If a donor sends you something and they say we want to use this for that, guess what? You now have money that can only be used for that, whether or not you ever plan to do that or not.
Okay. Now, what happens when churches like have a whole bunch of designated funds and like every ministry has their own designated fund and or you have people who are like, hey, I only want to give towards this part of the ministry in the church that's designated?
It's part of the danger. In 20 something years of doing ministry, I have yet to find a time where designated funds and having them available does not cannibalize general giving. Pastors will talk to their blue in the face to say, hey, we have this additional XYZ ministry that you can give to. Would you consider giving, and the key words here, this is very Southern Baptist for you, above and beyond your normal tithes and offerings. Which, it's great, but very rarely is your average, and we could do a whole commentary on types of givers. I have all those things in play as well. But your average church giver is going. They will always, if they were going to give you $100, and you say we have this new ministry we'd love you to give to, they're going to give you $90 to the general fund and now $10 to the other ministry.
Right.
More than
Is it
likely, it
ever,
will
I guess the
penalize.
question is it ever really above and beyond when they give,
Not
is
from
what
your
you're
average
saying?
giver. Not from your faithful saints. Absolutely, they'll give above and
Hmm.
beyond. But your normal, typical tither, probably
Yeah.
not. You know,
Well, now you've had a situation with a church that a lot of their money got into designated funds and it zapped their general giving. What happened with that church? Because you have a special phrase of doing so many, what is it? If you do a whole bunch of designated funds, you may go designated something. How's that
designated
phrase?
broke. You are designated broke. You could have $100,000 in the bank and you're closing your doors because that money was given for a specific purpose, and that purpose is not keeping the doors open. So
Mm,
now there are some ways, or I say that in a scare way, but it's not an overnight thing that you could just take that money and use it to keep the doors open. I mean, there are some
right.
processes you can go through, but again, it adds complexity, it adds steps, it adds problems.
In your experience, have you found that yes, there are those rules and regulations and responsibilities to, if you want to try to save those designated funds into general giving, though, that usually at that point in time takes more time than it was to meet the need of what the general fund emergency may be.
Say that again. Flesh that out a little bit.
Sure. So if the rules and regulations that you have to follow, yes, you can go designated broke, and yes, you can transfer those funds out of the designated funds, but that takes time. And a lot of times for churches, that time would take much longer than whatever the emergency, the financial emergency may
Yes.
be needed in the general fund.
Correct. Yeah, because in most cases you have to go back to the donor and ask them if you can undesignate their gift. You know,
Yeah.
and so you got to find them. Got to figure out who they are. Where are they at? How much do they get? There's just a
Right.
lot of hoops you have to jump through.
Right.
And that does go. That goes back to why I come at this. Obviously, I'm biased by how I'm talking. That I'm biased against utilizing designated funds in a church, just because of this very scenario where I don't know where they started. I don't know how we got here. I don't know why, as you said, they've been around forever, but why? It's kind of like church committees. Why did we ever go there? It really kind of puts us in the scenario of, man, it's just so much easier if we avoid it, and it makes for a much more healthy ministry as well.
Now, what about those who may say, well, there are some funds that you should have designated, like, very simple ones. Like some people say, like a capital campaign, like if they're trying to save money for a building to have that, is that
Sure.
okay to do? But is it just trying to limit them as much as a church possibly can?
Yes, I would say to limit them. Now, those are the ones I can buy into. The funds I can buy is capital fund building campaign. Yeah. Okay. We want to hold money aside. We want to do this. We want to build a building. We want to buy a building. We want to do something. The beauty of that in those scenarios like that is when that campaign is over, those monies undesignate themselves. Is one of the cool things about that. The other one I can buy into is a missions or a benevolence type scenario where we just want to pull money aside for, to do what we're supposed to do as a church anyway. Those are the ones I can buy into. Now, unfortunately, what I run into is, we've got the flowers for the pulpit fund. It's like, well, we're never going to put flowers in the pulpit. So why are we doing this? And those types of things where, and unfortunately, and this is where the danger comes in for some pastors, people start to dictate by their giving. And that just puts us in a world of, it really can start to silo your church into saying, well, pastor, I didn't really like what you preached about last Sunday. So instead of giving to the general fund now, I'm going to give to the youth budget.
Yeah.
And then we end up with silos based on people's personalities and opinions on what you're doing as a church.
Right. I think it bears that we probably need to have another conversation about donor giving and designating when they give and how they give and what really technically would be considered a deduction or not.
Yeah.
And
Well, that
I
does come
can,
into play anytime. Yeah. Yep. And that you just don't, it just spirals. It adds so much more complexity to your church finances that it's undue complexity. It's not necessary. There are ways around it. Um,
mhm.
Designated funds are not a rite of passage. It does not mean that all of a sudden you've reached a pinnacle as a church that, oh, we've
Right.
grown into a mature stage. We're going to start doing fund accounting. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not required of churches. It's not something you have to do either.
That's funny. That's
So
funny. When we're doing church planting and stuff, you think about, oh, there'll be that day that I can start doing designated funds. And you're like, no, you don't need to.
well, just as people in general, and for some reason, churches it gets exacerbated, and in that we just like to make things more difficult than they need to be sometimes, and I don't
Hmm.
know why. And some of it is that, I mean, a whole nother video we could do is on your first hire. And people are like, oh man, once I've hired that first person, now I've made it as a church planter and
Yeah.
a pastor.
Right.
No,
Yep.
no, that's not the
No.
case.
It's funny. So with the goal, I mean, especially here at Simplify Church, our goal really is to help people simplify. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of doing accounting. There's a lot of different ways of viewing things, but our goal is to really help simplify. So with that being said, if 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 I'm a pastor and I have inherited a church, or I've been with a church and I've been responsible for creating some designated funds, how do I begin to reverse that process? What do I need to do?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not a turnkey. This works for everybody. Kind of
Okay.
the finance advice caveat. The individual facts of your situation may be fact dependent. You should consult a financial person or an attorney
Right.
on this. So there's not one right answer to that because there's just a lot of ways that churches have done things in the past and set it up. There may be some
Yeah.
real legal constraints that we need to be careful of, and just a stock answer to unwind that. However, there are
Mhm.
some ways as you start to move forward that, again, if you know the donors, you know who gave to those things, you know where it's at, to ask them, hey, can we unwind these gifts? Can we undesignate them, and
Mhm.
go down that route? There are some ways you could do it through your church board minutes, and things like that, your church council, whatever the governing body is of your entity, you can start to do it that way. Again,
Mhm.
document, 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 all
Yeah.
those kinds of things. And then finally, there are, moving forward, there are two things. One is there is some verbiage you can start to use in your giving process to say, hey, we would allow, we are open to you allocating, is a word I use, not designate, allocating how you would like to these funds to be used. However, as a church, we reserve the right to use these as we see fit for the ministry of our church. And again, you'll want to there may be some state specific things that have to be done for that, for your nonprofit, things like that. But there are some ways you
Mhm.
can do that where you give the disclaimer on your giving, for that. Another thing to do, in that as well, and this takes some guts on pastor, or whomever is receiving the gift. Someone gives with a designation, give it back and say thank you for your generosity and your intentions. However, we don't receive money with designations here. So if you'd
Mm.
like to give, we'd be more than happy to accept your gift. However, and some pastors will push back on me. Say, "Oh, what you're going to turn down money?" Well, if I have to use it, on the designation of what the donor gave it to me for anyway, what's the difference? If I'm never going to do whatever they designated it for, it doesn't matter whether I have it or not, because otherwise it just sits there. And so, you know, I think more and more the churches are realizing that, the more we can do things as a kingdom mindset, where everything goes into the church, to be used how we see fit as we're moving the ministry forward. I think more and more we'll see ministries really flourish and grow, in that process.
So then they're not strapped by the rules of the designated funds, but being more sensitive to how the vision for the church is being
Yep.
positioned and used and moving forward, where the church is, where God has led that church.
Exactly. Yep.
Excellent. All right, everybody. Well, there's our brief, ever so brief rundown of the dangers of designated funds. We'll have more information coming along the way. Please check us out at www.simplifiedchurch.com, where you can find out more information about who we are and what we do. We love the local church, and our goal is to help you simplify your finances, your operations in a way that allows you more time for ministry. Thanks again for joining us. Josh, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.